Awesome. Welcome, Joe Candido. This is the Quality Values Podcast. So the question is, what are your values in the context of your story? And Devin connected us. You're an expert in leadership and sales, so we've got a lot to talk about. You've got a lot of stuff in your brain that I'd like to learn. So thanks for coming on, Joe.
Oh my God, it's such a pleasure to be here, Jake. Thank you so much.
Um, so you've got a book, and I love doing these podcasts with people who have books since they've already got their information kind of organized and compartmentalized. So let's start there. We'll branch off into other facets of your life, but let's just start with the book since you've already got that organized. It's called Leadership Selling, correct?
Yes.
All right. So what is leadership selling to you? What's the thesis of the book? What's the core messages that you're delivering in there?
Yeah, so leadership selling really is kind of a summary of my career, really. It's about selling and about revenue growth. And I do a lot of work with sales teams to help them execute better, be more successful, grow their revenue, that sort of thing. But really, it's bigger than that. And the reason why I'm excited to be on your show is because, you really do emphasize values. And, quite frankly, I think there's a lot of confusion about what selling is and what it isn't, and what works and what doesn't, right? And so leadership selling is really, it's kind of a long story, but it's really about operating from your core values and aligning with a customer and literally helping them, putting them first, not yourself, not your product, not your company. It's not, how many probing questions can I ask in the first 5 minutes? It's none of that, right? It's really about making a genuine connection, understanding something about your customer's business, their competition, their customers, and being able to offer some information that's helpful to them, right? And if you think about it for a minute, Jake, I want to give you a scenario. Imagine two people call on you, and they both want to sell you something. And one of them is just pitching right out of the gate, okay? And they're telling you how great they are and they've got a product and how fantastic it is, okay? And the other person actually knows about you, they know about your background, they know about your podcast show, and they contact you and they say, hey, I've got some information that I think will make you more successful with your podcasts. I've been listening to your podcasts. I think they're really great. I work with other podcasters, and I've got a couple of suggestions I want to share with you based on some research I've done or based on conversations I've had. And they start to talk a little bit about your business. Which one's going to get your attention?
Yeah, the one that's about me.
The one that's about you, exactly, right? The one that's about you, especially if it's genuine, right? It can't be fake. It has to be genuine, okay? So, that's really what selling should be. It should be, what do I know about this company? What do I know about this individual that I'm contacting? What are their challenges? What are they trying to accomplish? And what information can I share that might be helpful to them? And it doesn't mean you're not sharing a solution. You're not sharing a product. You're literally sharing information. And so this is a value of mine, right? A value of mine is that you have to earn respect. You have to earn trust, and you have to earn credibility. Okay? And people would be an idiot to do business with you if they don't trust you, if they don't think that you're credible, if they don't have some sort of experience with you that gives them confidence that you might be able to help them. Okay. Now, it's one thing if you're buying something simple, like if you're buying, like this little remote control or something, you can buy it on Amazon. You don't need a relationship, right? But if you're buying something important or complicated or expensive or has an installation related to it or is going to impact your success, then you better know who you're working with, right? So that's a value of mine, right? That's a core belief that I have, that, trust and credibility and relationship are everything. And if you don't have that, you can't do business.
And so what's your process for building trust? How does that look? Is there a research phase? Do you ask questions? When you're approaching me, asking me about my podcast to help me find podcast solutions, how do you learn about my podcast? Or is it in the conversation? Is it before the conversation? Is it all the above?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So from a business perspective, from a selling or even just relationships in business, I'm a firm advocate of doing research before you get engaged, before you start the engagement. Okay. Now, sometimes you have industry expertise, so you don't have to do that much research. For example, I've done a ton of business in the telecommunications, technology, and IT sectors. I know a lot about those. I'm often a keynote speaker on emerging technologies. Last year, I probably did, 20 speeches on AI and its implications for business, right? So if you know something about their industry already, then the research you have to do is a lot less, okay? But, you got to go to their website. You got to go to LinkedIn. You want to look for some connections. Who do I know that knows you, that can help me learn about you before I contact you, right? So I think that at minimum, you have to do some research. And the question is how much based on what do you already know about them or about their competitors or about their industry. But yes, you've got to do research. And that research pays off, but a lot of salespeople don't want to do it. And the reason why they don't want to do it is they think it's a waste of time. And worse than that, their sales leaders think it's a waste of time. And they want them to do these high velocity calling. And I want to tell you, that approach doesn't work 95% of the time. You're dialing for dollars. You have no relationship. You don't make a connection. It's like a spray and pray thing. And everybody thinks the more calls you make, the more success you're going to have. And here's my expression to that. Even a blind squirrel finds an acorn once in a while. But most blind squirrels die of starvation. Okay, so I don't want to base my career on luck. Like maybe I'll get lucky and someone will answer the phone that actually wants to buy from me. Sure, it's going to happen once in a while, but you're going to die of starvation. It's a stupid approach. I just got to say it, this high velocity, make as many calls as possible. It just doesn't work. And I can prove to you it doesn't work because look at how many companies are out there trying to say, I can do your cold calling for you. Right? And everybody's trying to do the same thing. And it's just a saturated, flooded market, because it doesn't work. I mean, name the company that's great at cold calling. Nobody knows who they are. We're all hoping to find them, but they don't exist because it's a flawed approach, And so doing the research in the end saves a lot of time. Building that relationship before you start selling improves your success dramatically. So salespeople and sales leaders have to have some patience and actually be customer centric, which is another one of my values. If you're not customer centric, you won't be sincere in your conversations. You won't be sincere in your engagement. You'll be looking for a way to manipulate the customer to your benefit. And there goes your trust.
And so how do you gauge success? Since I like what you're talking about. You mentioned in this high velocity calling, and that's easy to gauge with stats.
Yeah.
Employee A made X number of calls over this time frame. Yeah. So you've got the data you're gathering. It's a little harder to gauge. Oh, I did an hour of research before making this call, and it was a higher quality call. So how do you kind of balance that? How do you track the value of the research phase, of the preparation phase, of the quality of the call, rather than just the quantity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's just talk about, measurements and tracking a little bit. And I'll start off with the high velocity. You are right. It's easy to know how many calls I make per day. And, a lot of times that's tracked right by my CRM tool, because we buy a list, right, which we think is qualified because it has someone's name and phone number and job title and email. But that doesn't make it qualified, in my opinion. What really makes it qualified is if the list could tell me, what are that person's goals? What are their challenges? Who are their customers? So I could actually do some research and align with them, right? So that would be a much better list, but those lists don't exist. The lists we get are names and numbers and email addresses. But anyway, so we can measure the number of calls, the number of people that answer the phone, the number of people that schedule a meeting. We can measure that. We can measure, do we get a second meeting, a third meeting, and do we ultimately make a sale, and what the margin is on that sale. We can measure all of it. And oh, by the way, when you do measure all of that, it's pretty depressing, okay? Because what you're going to find out is that, you make a lot of calls before you get a meeting, and a very small percentage of your first meetings agree to a second meeting because there wasn't a fit in the first place. You didn't say the right things. You didn't know enough about them. Yeah, you got them on the phone. Yeah, they took a meeting, but it didn't go any further. Okay. But you can measure that stuff. And, you can measure it in strategic calling as well, where you're doing the research first. You can look at my schedule and say, well, Joe made 8 phone calls today instead of 70. Okay, he made 8. I know he made 8. What were the results? Oh, out of those 8 calls, he got 3 meetings. Oh, that's a really high percentage. How many of those first meetings turned into second meetings? Oh, 60% of the first meetings turned into second meetings. Wow, that's a staggering percentage. So you can still measure it. Of those meetings, how many of them turned into sales? And oh, by the way, what was the margin on those sales? What's the customer satisfaction score on those sales? What's the repeat business on those sales? So in both scenarios, it can be measured. We just have to understand that velocity all by itself does not tell the story. Okay? Match the velocity up with other KPIs, other measurements, and ultimately match the velocity up with sales and margin and satisfied customers. And then compare that to a lower velocity that's more targeted. And what you'll discover is, in the end, that lower velocity, it's like the tortoise versus the hare, right? The hare is the rabbit. They come out of the starting blocks really fast, but in the end, the tortoise wins the race. And I like that analogy, but I always want to put a little caution there. Strategic calling is not that much slower than high velocity calling. It's not like you make 1 call a week. It's not that anemic, okay? But there's no point in making a call if you're not ready. Okay, I mean, let's be clear about that. All you're going to do is damage your reputation, and you're going to slam that door shut hard, and that person will not want to take a second call from you because you've blown it. Okay, so you do want to be ready before you make a call, and if you're not ready, don't call.
I like it. So it's based on the way you're outlining the metrics. What I'm hearing is that you're really breaking it down to the expected customer value per time, per day, or per hour, whatever unit of time you want to use. But
Yep.
yeah, you've got the rate to the first meeting, rate to the second meeting, value of the closed customer, potential repeat customer, and then yeah. So I like the way you've done it. It's not just a volume metric. You're calculating value. You're tracking it all back down to the value.
Yeah, yeah, and that also gives us an opportunity for coaching. Okay, so if I run a report, if I'm a sales leader and I run a report and I see one of my people's making, a good number of calls, but they're not getting any meetings, well, then let's explore what's going on at the call stage. Maybe they're not saying the right things. Maybe they're not contacting the right level in the organization. Maybe they haven't done their research. But now we can start to say, hey, what's going on? You're not achieving the typical number of meetings, or you're not getting a second meeting. Your second meeting, success is very low. Well, obviously something's not happening right in the first meeting. We can look into that and try and figure it out. So, in sales, that funnel report should really have a lot of key activities, because if things aren't going right, now we can go in and identify where the failure point is and correct it, improve it. So yes, I care about results, but it's like in math. Remember when your teacher said, show your work? They wanted to know if you got the answer right, but they also wanted to see your work. Because if you got the answer right, but your work demonstrated you didn't really understand how to do it, then you got lucky. And if you got the answer wrong, but you showed your work and you really knew how to do it, then you got like 90% credit, even though you got the answer wrong, because you knew how to do it and you just made a mistake in the middle. And so, in sales, we really, as in life, by the way, we really want to show our work, not just our results, because the work is then the teachable moment, the coaching, the opportunity to learn from your mistakes, from your failures, and become better. If all we do is look at results, we don't learn anything.
All right. So for the sake of context, what's your experience in sales? How did you end up in the sales world? And what kind of led you to being the leadership selling guru?
Well, my career started out working for a company that sold technology. They were selling computers when computers were relatively new. And so I took a sales job and started selling these computers. And people would ask me, well, what does it do? How can it help me? how do I justify the cost? Because there wasn't enough understanding of the product by the market. And so I realized that I didn't have the answer to those questions and that I would never succeed if I didn't. So I finally said to somebody, quite honestly, I don't really know if it can help you. I don't know enough about your business. Would you be willing to spend time with me showing me your business? And then I'll see if maybe this could really be of a great value to you. Maybe it can, maybe it can't. But how about it? Would you spend some time with me because it might be good for you? And I was like, yeah, okay, I'll do that. So I found someone that would spend some time with me. And I felt like an intern. I went into their business and they showed me what they did and they showed me how they did their billing and who their customers were. And it actually happened to be a printing company, what their product was. And I literally learned about their business. And then I started asking questions. I was like, oh, well, that looks kind of manual. It looks like you spend a lot of time with human labor doing that report. The computer might be able to help there. It might be able to automate that. And so we started looking, once I understood their business and I knew what the computer could do, we started, looking for alignment between what their needs were and what my product could do. And, honestly, that was a revelation, an epiphany. It changed my whole attitude in terms of how I was going to, make sales. And so initially what I started doing is I started asking people for permission to learn about their business. And that worked pretty good, but not that well because it's a big ask. Let me ask you, hey, Jake, I want you to spend hours and hours educating me so that maybe I can sell you something.
Yeah.
Meh. Some people are going to say yes to that, and I got lucky. I found the few that did. But what I realized is there's not a lot in it for you, right? There might be something in it for you, but you're taking a lot of risk because you're investing time with me and all of that. So what I started doing was targeting different industries and becoming an expert on those industries. Okay? Then when I contacted someone, I already knew a lot about their industry. And then I could be a thought leader. And so I took it to the next level. And I started coming to folks with white papers and reports, not from me, but from third-party credible resources. Here's a document from Deloitte or from KPMG. Here's some information that I think would be helpful to you because I've shared this information with other people in your industry and they've loved it. Okay, so I started becoming that consultant or that educator or that advisor, and I adopted a philosophy called give to get. I give first, I earn credibility, I earn trust, and then they're willing to talk to me. And so that was, how my career went, right? I just kind of fell into it and I failed and I learned from my mistakes. And over time, I evolved a system that actually had good, repeatable results.
Super cool. And the system that you run now is this kind of is this separate from an industry or does this kind of fit into that tech industry that you came up in?
It is separate from any single industry, but it does have some guardrails, right? My, leadership selling is about business to business selling. Okay. There's a few exceptions, but really it's not about consumers. Okay. It's really about having a sales interaction with another human.
Can you expand on that a little bit? What is the difference between selling to consumers versus selling to businesses? What are the different priorities that you're kind of catering to or not to?
Sure. So I would say that, the priorities might be the same, but the sales experience is very different. So let me use Amazon as a classic example because everybody knows Amazon. If you want to buy, a really cool, coffee mug like this one, which you can't really see, but there it is, right? If you want to buy a coffee mug or, a book or a watch or what I would classify as a consumer product, you typically do your own research, right? You go out on the internet, you do some research, you go to Amazon. They show you a whole bunch of similar products, right? Because it's all done by technology. And then you pick the one you want and you buy it. And there is no salesperson relationship, okay? So that's a business to consumer model, right? The business would be Amazon or it'd be the coffee cup maker or the person that makes the watch, right? The company that makes the watch. That's the business. And they're selling direct to a consumer. So they're going to use marketing channels and they're going to use retail store channels, and they're going to use e-commerce channels, Okay. Um, Now, in the retail channel, there is usually some sort of a human associate. They're not really a salesperson, but let's say you're buying clothes, they can say, "Hey, that looks good on you," or "Let me get you a different size," or "Yes, we've got that product, but I'm going to recommend a product that's a little bit different." So there is an associate that can assist you, right? It's a human associate. But for the most part, the consumer makes their own decisions, and they don't get a lot of help from another human. Okay, they don't have a salesperson that they're directly working with. Business to business is opposite that. Business to business says that, my company has a team of salespeople and they call on other companies and they build relationships with these companies and they hope to do business together. And so that's a different approach. That's the business to business approach. And my book's really geared towards that. For the most part, it's business to business, but here's where a few exceptions come into play. Let's say I'm a financial planner. Well, that's an example where we've got an expert or a salesperson or an advisor working with a consumer. Okay, because I might sell my financial planning services to individuals, and so now it's business to consumer with a salesperson. Okay, so there are some scenarios where that exists, but for the most part, when there's a sales team employed by a company, they're usually selling to other companies.
Okay. I wanted to dive into kind of the epiphany that you had when you initially were doing technology sales and you switched it
Mm-hmm.
to let me learn about your business.
Yeah,
This might be an overgeneralization, but let me throw this at you and see what
sure.
bounces back. So, in that moment, it sounded to me like you'd been selling like let me show you all the reasons that you should get this product, and then that was kind of the moment where you're like, let me see what the reasons are why you might not want to buy this product. Let me, and that's the person you're selling to is kind of on the defensive, and they're looking for reasons to not buy when you're presenting reasons that they should buy. But did you kind of make that paradigm shift? Is this a fair generalization to make that you kind of shifted into that? Show me why you wouldn't buy it. Let me understand why you wouldn't buy it. And then if we find out in that process that actually there are good reasons to buy it, maybe we can go ahead and make something happen. Is that a fair generalization?
Actually, it was a little bit different than that. What I did was I forgot about the product completely. I took it off the table. Okay, it was no longer a product conversation. It was a conversation about them and their business and their competitors and their customers. Okay, it was about them. That was the conversation. And what I was really trying to understand is there a gap between their current state and their desired state? What are they trying to accomplish in their business? What are the goals that they have that they're not able to achieve? And why aren't they able to achieve those? And maybe I could help them achieve them. Okay. So it really becomes a customer centric business outcome conversation where you're playing the role of advisor. Okay. So let's go back to, you, and let's say I called on you about your podcasting business. And I said, hey, there's some interesting statistics over the last year. These areas of podcasting are becoming very popular, and these areas are becoming less popular. And this is an interesting market to target, and here's why. And Jake, when I look at your business, I see that you have a lot of expertise in, in-depth conversational podcasts. Well, there's a trend that suggests, and so now we're talking about your industry. Okay, I'm not selling anything. I'm sharing information. Okay, and so in leadership selling, this is called the engage stage. In the engage stage, we don't sell anything. In fact, when I teach this and we do role plays, when the sales reps do this role play, it's so funny. We literally give them a script at the beginning. Now, you shouldn't have a script in the real world, but we give them one at the beginning, right? And they go off the script and they start pitching. They can't help themselves, and we hit a buzzer. You're pitching. You can't do that. But you literally don't sell anything, because how can I possibly sell you something when I don't know anything about you yet, or I don't know enough? Right? So what I do know about is I know about your industry, and I've done some research, and my research is ultimately going to be related to things that I do. Okay, but I'm not selling yet. So what I'm doing in the engage stage is I'm earning your trust, and we're starting to find some common ground. Okay, and if I do that well, you'll start talking. You'll start asking questions. Well, who wrote that report? Well, what else does it say? Well, yeah, you're right. I do in-depth podcasts. You know, do you have any information on that? You're going to start to get curious because we're talking about your world. All right. That's very different than saying to you, hey, you know what? I don't want to be pushy. I do have this great product, but it may not be a fit for you. So, tell me why it's not. That's still a product conversation. And I don't think we're ready for that. I haven't earned your trust yet. I haven't established credibility yet. And I need to get you thinking about your business and where you want to go with it and how you're going to get there. And then, you might start to see me as a resource.
And so when does that shift happen? When do you switch from engagement selling to pulling the product out on the table and shifting to a pitch? Does that happen, or do you wait for the client to make that turn? When does it become a sale?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a great question. So the first stage is engage, right? And then the next stage is explore. And what happens is if we have a good conversation about your industry, about changes in your industry, about trends, you're going to start to think how that affects you and your business. Okay. And you're going to start to ask me some questions like, well, what do you think about this? Or is anybody else doing that? Or sometimes you come right out and say, well, how does this affect me? Or can you help me? You start asking questions because now you're actually thinking about what does it mean for my business. And at that point, I'm still not ready to sell, but I do ask you a question. I say, hey, those are great questions you're asking, Jake, and I'd love to share my ideas, but I'm not ready to do that yet. I need to learn a little bit more about your business. Would you spend an hour talking with me, or 30 minutes, however, whatever amount I think I need? But, would you spend some time talking with me where I can ask some questions that are specific to you and your business? Because in order for me to give you my ideas and my recommendations, I have to map this information to you. And I'm missing that piece right now. And so I get your permission to do a discovery, to do an explore. And you're ready for it now because I've earned some credibility. And you're thinking, wow, Joe might be able to help me. And so you say, yeah, sure. And then I start, I schedule a meeting with you and I start asking questions. This is the first time I start really asking questions. Because at the beginning I'm sharing information. And that causes you to ask me questions. And then I get permission to do a discovery. Now you're going to educate me on your business. You want to educate me on your business because the more you tell me, the more likely it is I can help you. So now you're willing to do it. You see value in it. Okay. And this is very different than like solution selling. Solution selling is you ask the customer a bunch of probing questions. But the problem with that is when you ask those probing questions, they're all designed to quickly steer the customer right back to your product. So it's real narrow and it's kind of manipulative. And it's not really learning about their business. It's just trying to find a pain point. All right. So I want to really understand what's going on in your business. And sometimes what happens is when you educate me, I discover I can't help you. That's okay. I can help enough people. I don't have to help everybody. When you do this process, it works really well. You got other appointments booked. You're going to be able to help people. And I'll say to you, you know what? It sounds like, the challenges you're having aren't in my expertise. And, I hope this information has been really valuable to you, but I don't have a solution for you. And I say that once in a while. And when I do it, people love me. They respect me so much. I want to be honest. Integrity is a really big value of mine. And I know that at minimum, I've helped that person and I haven't damaged my reputation. And a lot of times they'll call me back in the future or they'll refer me to somebody. So it's okay. But most of the time I can help you. And so at the end of the discovery stage, I move into resolve. And resolve is where I make recommendations. And that's when I start selling.
Interesting. I did a episode with MC Lobsher. Do you know him? I met
Yeah,
him through yeah. One thing that came up in our conversation was the abundance versus scarcity mindset.
yeah,
So I'll
yeah.
ask you a similar question since I'm kind of sensing that come through here, where you're not afraid of losing the sale, and you might almost welcome it because it gives you an opportunity to build trust, which might lead to
Yep.
opportunities down the road. So my question is, what does it take to kind of have that abundance mindset? Is that something that you built over time after having a track record? Is that something that every time you come into this situation where you're telling someone, hey, I actually can't help you, do you have to remind yourself like this might this might come back and bring me a windfall in the future, because I'm being honest and I'm giving the person the most reliable information I have. So, yeah,
Wow. Yeah, we could talk about this all day. This is such a great topic. I will try not to take too long to share a few thoughts on it. First off, I think the idea of abundance versus scarcity is something that it was a seed that got planted in my head a long time ago and it grew. Okay. And it grew through experiences and reading and those sorts of things. And in my life, I saw that philosophy or that belief kind of converge through different experiences. And so, for example, I had a counselor tell me once that there's only 4 emotions: sad, glad, mad, and here comes the big one, afraid. All right. And fear is a terrible emotion and it drives most of our dysfunctional behavior. And you see it in politics all the time. You see it in countries that feel like there's not enough resource and we got to get ours. And the only way we're going to get ours is to go to war or to cheat or to do tariffs or to do whatever we're going to do because we're afraid. It's really rooted in fear. Okay. And there's a lot of fear in the world and there's a lot of fear in business. We call it risk and risk mitigation. But, and we have this stupid expression, what keeps you up at night, right? But all that's around fear. Okay. It's around fear. So fear is very real and it drives a lot of crazy behavior. But, for me, integrity, being clear about my values overcomes fear. The best way for me to have an abundance mindset and be able to walk away from a deal is knowing that I've got other opportunities, that I'm not desperate. Okay. Desperation is a terrible thing. If you don't have any food and you're hungry, you're going to steal food. You're going to, eat dirt. You're going to do really desperate things. Right. And so, first off, if you want to be successful in sales, you have to have a good pipeline and you got to put energy there. And that's part of what we do is we teach people how to do that so they don't have to pick misfits. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've sold deals I should have never closed. And then I had the nightmare of delivering on them. And it was a nightmare, okay? And I learned from that. I mean, I struggled through it. I never left a customer high and dry, but I was bleeding pretty bad by the end of it, where you're like, oh my gosh, I wish I had never done this. What a huge mistake. And you go back and you analyze it and say, well, why did I do it? And the answer is, well, I was afraid I didn't have any other business. And, then I spent all this time delivering something that I wasn't good at because I should have never sold it in the first place. And that took me away from finding a better opportunity. All right. So the school of hard knocks is a good teacher. After a while, you start to learn that, the lack of, abundance is really damaging. That belief of scarcity, that belief that there's not enough can really get you in trouble and cause you to do some bad stuff. I don't mean like illegal bad stuff, but, it can really cause you to like screw up and make mistakes and spin your wheels and, promise things you can't deliver on and all that kind of stuff. And I see it all the time in business. I see companies, that are so afraid. They do these bids. They have no relationship with the customer. It's on super low margin and they never win them. And then when they do, it's a nightmare. That's all fear-based behavior. That's all scarcity-based behavior. Let's go build a pipeline. Let's go build relationships with C-suite executives and get repeat business at good margin where they love you and you love them. Let's do that.
So then my question shifts to how do you build a pipeline? I've actually have a product right now and that's kind of what's behind some of these questions. I want to sell it, but I don't have a track record. I don't have a pipeline of appointments. So once I start selling it, I'll be selling my first unit, then my second unit. Eventually, in theory, I can build up that pipeline. I can build up the successful reps to the point where I have faith that I'll continue to have successful reps, even if I kind of push people who don't need it away from it,
Sure.
So yeah, how can I get ahead of that? How can I build the pipeline to start the abundance mindset cycle?
Well, the early work that I do with companies is we build a sales strategy, and I ask a few key questions. And probably the best question I ask is, why should someone buy from you? So Jake, you got a product. Why should someone buy it? And that's a key question because we have to figure out what makes it special. Who is it targeted towards? What does it do for them? How does it differentiate from the competition? You have to make sure you have a market. okay? And that you can win in that market, that you can compete, that you offer something that's special. My terminology is unique and compelling, all right? You want your product to be unique and compelling, right? It's got to be both, So, unique says that nobody else has it. Compelling says that people want it. You can be unique and not compelling. You can have a product that nobody wants, right? It's unique, but nobody wants it. Or you can have a product everybody wants, but it's not unique. All your competition has the same thing. So, unique and compelling is important. And here's the secret, in my opinion. Generally speaking, your product will be copied by your competition if it isn't already. Because if you come up with something good in a short period of time, people will start to copy it. We see this all the time. I mean, just go to Amazon and type in, computer mouse and see how many mice come up, right? There's hundreds of different companies making the same product, and they're all so similar. And you sit there and read the descriptions, and like, oh my God, they're all USB and they're Bluetooth, and they've got a rechargeable battery, and they've got a wheel, and they've got 2 buttons, and it's ergonomically designed, and oy vey, like they're all the same. Okay, so how do you make your product unique? And usually the answer is the experience exceeds the product features. Okay. So I can't help you yet because I don't know about what your product is, but we have to figure out how can we deliver this product to a segment of the market where it really resonates with them, where we can build trust and loyalty, where they're happy to pay a little bit more. And look at the companies that are able to charge more, right? Why? I mean, why do people pay more for an Apple computer than they do for a Windows computer? Well, because the consumer believes it's a better experience. That's why. Apple never sells on features. They never say, oh, look, our CPU is faster than competitor number 1 and our screen is brighter than competitor number 2. They never even talk about the features of the product. They show the experience. Okay. Here, we're going to play a little quick game. You want to play a game with me?
Yeah, I love it.
All right. I'm going to describe a product and I'm going to be cagey. I'm not going to be real obvious in how I describe it. Okay. But I won't lie to you. And then you have to guess it. Okay. So the product I'm thinking of, I'm going to tell you 3 things about it before you can start guessing. So the product I'm thinking of is a scientific measuring device. It measures things like the movement of celestial bodies, like the sun, the moon, the earth, stuff like that, okay? The movement of celestial bodies. Now, here's the 3 things that are crazy about this product. First off, it's not as accurate as its competitors, right? Second off, it's way more money than almost all of its competitors. So less accurate, more expensive. Third off, it's got a great reputation and people happily pay more for it knowing it's not as accurate. Name that product.
I'm guessing.
Or the company.
I'm guessing some kind of high-tech telescope or something like that.
Yeah, that's a really good guess. It's small. It can fit in your hand. And it's a consumer product.
Compass?
Oh, that's a really good guess. It's similar to a compass, but it is not a compass. But it's round usually. It could be rectangular, and it has hands like a compass does.
A watch?
A watch. Now, what brand of watch is wicked expensive? People love to buy it, and it doesn't tell time as well as watches that are far less expensive.
Is it a Rolex?
It's a Rolex, baby. Okay? It's a Rolex. Rolex does not have a value proposition of we tell time better than anybody else. They don't say, oh, look at us compared to Timex. Look at us compared to, Sanyo or Cisco or whoever. Like, look how accurate we are. No, it's an experience. Their value proposition is the longevity, the craftsmanship, the materials that are used, the gems that are used. Like everything about that watch has nothing to do with telling time. Okay, and when people buy it, they know they could buy a watch for less, but they don't want a different watch. They want that watch because of the recognition, the emotion, the experience. So they don't compete with all the other watchmakers. They might compete with Cartier and a few others, but they have carved out a niche where their value proposition it goes beyond the product. Starbucks does the same thing. Starbucks does the same thing. The value proposition of Starbucks is it's a personal pampering. It's a personal luxury. You may not be going to Tahiti this year, but you certainly can afford a Starbucks cup of coffee to start your day off right. You're worth it. It's got nothing to do with the coffee.
That's fascinating. I have heard that a Rolex you have to adjust it every year. Or I forget what the
Yeah.
time period is. But yeah, it's. I
Well,
never thought about how
the
ridiculous that
Rolex
is
is
until you frame it that way.
the Rolex is mechanical, right? It's a mainspring and you wind it. And most watches today are quartz with a battery. They're way more accurate. Some watches today have Wi-Fi and they synchronize with the internet. So they're always accurate, right? I mean, the Rolex it's different.
Yeah.
It tells time good enough. I mean, the product has to work, right? The coffee has to be acceptable. The watch has to work. But you don't win by saying, oh, my product's better than your product. You've now just jumped into the swamp of direct competition. You don't even want to be in that swamp. You want to be differentiated. You want to be in the prairie, not in the swamp where you say, oh yeah, we tell time too, but we're way more than that. Telling time is easy. We do that, but we do something else that nobody else can do.
Yeah, I remember I had a sales job way back. I was selling DirecTV face to face in Costco, so it was high reps, low
Right.
conversion rate. But I remember my mentor at the time, my boss, he told me this thing. It was no one goes to Home Depot since they want a 3/8 inch drill bit. They want to hang their picture on the wall, and they need to
That's right.
drill a hole to do it. So if you're selling them the picture hung on the wall, convenience free, then they're more likely to buy than if you're just selling them, oh, this drill bit has this cobalt coating and yada, yada, yada.
That's
They don't
exactly
care. All
right.
they want is the picture on the wall.
That's right. That's exactly right. And if you talk to them a little bit and you understand what really matters to them and they start telling you about this specific project they have in mind, now you can align that drill with the successful achievement of the project. Bingo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
That's beautiful.
Yep.
All right. I'm curious a little bit about your process when you're working with clients. So you're coaching sales teams or you're coaching sales organizations right now, correct?
Yeah. So mostly, mostly my work starts with the C-suite or the leadership team based on how big the company is, and mostly with the sales team. But we want to work with marketing as well. And what's your overall strategy? Sometimes it's a new product launch or it's a go-to-market, or maybe they're just not achieving their goals. Maybe they're getting beat up by their competition. Okay, so we got to figure out what's going on, right? What's working, what's not working. So I start off with consulting, okay? Learning about their business, what's working, what's not working, and then building a sales strategy, just like we talked about, like your product, like how do we figure out who to target it to and how we differentiate, how we win. Let's figure that out, okay? Then we bring the leadership selling approach in and we apply it. Okay, so we're going to do thought leadership. We're going to be educated before we call on our target market. We're going to position ourselves as, very knowledgeable in this area. So we bring marketing in and they start to help, they'll create white papers and pull research so the salespeople don't have to do all that work themselves. And I guide a lot of that. I actually write a lot of white papers myself. In fact, I produce a bunch of content every year for Deloitte as an example in the tech sector. So, based on what the requirements are, I play a role there in helping to write all of that stuff. And then we start doing training, right? We implement the 4-stage methodology of leadership selling, which is very complementary to their specific sales cycle. And we start showing the salespeople, this is what you do first, and this is how you do it. This is what you do second, and this is how you do it. This is how you move to the engage stage. And there's tools and things that, we teach them. And we do this with the sales leadership because I'll tell you straight up, if the sales leadership isn't involved, it's never going to work. They have to be involved. And first off, if they don't believe in it, if they don't believe in it enough to participate in all of this, then what message are they sending to their team? Right? They're saying, it's not that important. So we have the sales leadership involved and we have training for them, training for the team. We put it all together and then we start running it live. And we observe, we coach, we go in the field, we see how it's going, we listen to Zoom calls, we listen to telephone calls, we review emails. We work with the team to go from fumbling to, flying okay, to figuring it out, right? Because it's always rough at the beginning. Whenever you ask someone to do something new, it's difficult. And I always say to people, look, whenever you do something new, you're going to fail at the beginning. It's not going to be perfect. It's new. It's new and it's challenging. But, if you don't quit, if you keep on practicing, you'll master it. There's no doubt you will, because leadership selling isn't that hard. It takes some time and some effort, but it's absolutely achievable by anybody that wants to. So we work with them, and that's the whole coaching piece. And, so you do the training, you do the coaching, you've implemented your strategy, you're showing your leadership how to do it, and before you know it, things are rolling. And now you've got a sustainable model, okay, that's going to produce and produce and produce. And it also gives them the ability to take it over so they're not dependent on me forever. Now, a lot of times they'll call me back for something new, some refinement, maybe they want, a new report. There's various stages, but my goal is for them to be autonomous, right? I want to teach them how to do this thing, get them rolling, and let them take it over.
And then what types of companies do you typically work with? How big are they? Is it certain industries that you kind of specialize in? You came from the tech industries. Are you still in there, or have you
Yeah.
kind of gotten more general since then?
So it's really interesting because I live in Vermont, and Vermont's a very small state, the second smallest state in the country. There's 640,000 people here, so it's kind of the whole state's the size of a small city, really. And, I'm really happy to do business locally. It's a lot of fun. There's lots of great companies here, and a lot of those companies are small. They might have a sales team of 5 people or 10 people, and that's great. I love working with them, and I can be really helpful to them and, really provide a lot of value to their leadership team. And, some of those clients have worked with me for years and years, and then they give me a referral to somebody else. And so, that piece of my business is very rewarding. I feel like I'm contributing to my community. And those are typically small companies, okay? They might be, 10 million in revenue to 50 million in revenue. Some of them are bigger. I've got some that are a few hundred million in revenue, but they tend to be smaller sales teams. And then on the other end, because I've worked in the telecom and tech sector for so long, I've worked with giant companies, AT&T and Cisco and TELUS in Canada and Deloitte, as I mentioned. And so a lot of those accounts have very, very large sales teams. And so we might spend a little bit of time setting strategy and then doing a ton of training, lots of training. Because I have big sales teams and we're taking them through, one program after another, and then we're observing them, and, maybe we're building a certification program so that they have a career path. So that gets a lot more complicated. Maybe it's the sales support people. We've got to bring them into the fold so that when they're team selling with the salesperson, they don't say the wrong thing. So for the large accounts, it tends to be a lot more training and a lot more structure to work through. And that's very rewarding in a different way. I travel, I work with these big accounts, I get involved in some very large deals. They sometimes bring me in to actually assist them with some of their big deals. And, that's a lot of fun to help land those big accounts. So candidly, I'm happy working with, small, mid-size and, enterprise accounts. My big verticals are the ones I've mentioned, telecom, technology, and IT. They're all kind of converged. I do a lot of work in media now just because it's converged into IT and technology. I do work in health science and healthcare. And I do work in manufacturing. So those markets I've done a lot of work in. But I'm also a generalist. What I find, Jake, is that every company is unique, but they also have a lot of things in common with other companies. There's common problems in sales that I don't care what industry you're in, they're pretty common. And so a lot of the work that I do is applicable from one industry to another.
And then with your clients, what's the vision that you're helping them realize? Like we talked about, when you're selling a 1/4-inch drill bit, the vision you're selling is the family portrait that you're going to hang on the wall that you have to initially drill a hole for. So you're selling sales solutions, you're selling training and systems. But what's the vision? Like, is it the company culture thing? Is it a results thing? The bottom line, the money that comes in, revenue at the end of the year. When you're meeting down, what is it that your clients really want, and what is it that you're helping them get towards?
So this is the tricky part, because really the vision of sales should be in direct alignment with the vision of the corporation, with the culture. They should all be the same, all right? So sometimes when you go into a company, they don't have much vision, or they have a very siloed vision, right? Sales has got one vision and operations has a vision, and the CEO has a different vision. Sometimes we got to back the bus up and say, we all got to get on the same page here. And if we don't, we're really never going to be anything to anybody. I mean, if you watch Simon Sinek's famous TED Talk on why, that's about vision and having the whole company know what it is, okay, and align to it, right? And some companies do that really well. Like if you think about Disney, their vision is to make people happy. And they can do it on a cruise ship. They can do it with an animated, a movie. They can do it, a whole bunch of ways with a theme park. But they're clear on what their vision is. It's entertainment. It's happiness. That's what they're doing. Okay. There's many companies that have real clarity on that vision. But that's the first thing is, does the company have a clear vision? And is it real? Sometimes the vision is a fantasy. Like I'll give you one example. Many years ago, there was an energy drink that decided that they were going to support breast cancer awareness. And so they took the product and they painted it pink and they did this whole breast cancer awareness, which was great that they wanted to support, the research for, preventing and curing breast cancer. That is wonderful. But it didn't align with their values because the product, was, full of caffeine and all kinds of stuff to give you energy. And it wasn't really, affiliated as, like a wellness product. Okay. And so there was a misalignment there between, who they said they were and how they behaved. And it flopped, that whole thing flopped on them because they weren't aligned. They weren't clear about who they are and who they're not. And so, vision, values, mission, strategy, they all go together. They should. They don't always, but they should. And the great companies understand that. And so when I get in there to do sales work, the first thing is to understand that, because if that thing's screwed up, we got to fix that before we go forward, because otherwise we can't deliver a message to the market that's accurate. And now we're going to lose credibility. So yeah, the vision's everything. And culture is the vision in action, right? There's a great story. Give me a minute here to tell this story. It's a great story. In the early 1980s, some people in Chicago died because they bought Tylenol at the drugstore and they took it and they died. And the reason why they died was because the product had been tampered with and cyanide was put into the Tylenol capsules. Okay, and the product was made by Johnson & Johnson, J&J. And J&J held an emergency meeting, and they said, what should we do about this? And they knew that that the cyanide was not introduced at their factory, that the product was good when it left the factory. They had enough data to know this. And they knew that it was tampering, at the retail level. It happened in 2 or 3 drugstores in Chicago. And so they said, well, it's really not our responsibility. It's a tragedy. We wish it hadn't happened to our product, but it's not our problem. We didn't do it, okay? So we don't have to fix it. And then one of the leaders said, you know what? Let's review the Credo. And the Credo was written in the 40s by the Johnson brothers. And it was really like a vision, mission statement before that was in vogue, okay? And they read the Credo. And one of the things the Credo said is that we are in business to serve healthcare providers and consumers, that's who we serve, and we are beholden to their well-being and health, okay? And they all read the Credo, which they'd read before, but they reread it, and within 30 minutes, they made the decision to do a worldwide recall of Tylenol. And a recall worldwide had never been done on a pharmaceutical product or an over-the-counter product before. It was unheard of. So here's a company that wasn't responsible, and they pulled it all off the shelves. Okay, because they didn't want another consumer to be injured, and they couldn't be sure if there was more dangerous, deadly Tylenol out there. Then they did 2 things that are absolutely remarkable, actually 3. They created tamper-evident packaging, which didn't exist then. Okay, so really what happened is somebody opened up the bottle, put the poison in there and closed the bottle, and you couldn't tell. There was no tamper evident. Now that's crazy today because everything's tamper evident today. You buy a bottle of water and you twist the cap and you can tell that the seal hasn't been broken yet. Okay, but it didn't exist in the 80s. And they changed the capsule, which was like 2 pieces of plastic that you could pull apart and all the little powder fell out, to a cap lid that was kind of, it's like what we have today. Like you can't pull it apart, empty out the medicine, put in new medicine or new poison, and put it back together. You can't do that, okay? So they they became a pioneer in creating safety in packaging and manufacturing of pharmaceuticals and over the counters. And they reintroduced Tylenol, and the market embraced it. That's an amazing story that was driven by their values. Now, quite frankly, I don't know what happened to that company, because if you check them out today, they know they've had a problem with baby powder for 50 years, and they did all they could do to deflect it and not take responsibility for it. And then they got sued, and they finally had to pay. So they've lost their way. They don't have the vision and values today that they once did, but they sure did have them in the 80s, and it was very impressive. And they were rewarded financially because Tylenol was their most successful product for 25 years after that. So there you go.
Yeah, that's incredible. I didn't know that full backstory, but Tylenol is kind of the Kleenex of
It is.
yeah, yeah, blood thinners. So that's interesting. I'm sure that it was a ton of money to recall Tylenol globally, but I bet they got their return in the end.
They did.
It's
And they walk the talk. They walk
yeah,
the talk.
walk the
And
talk.
that matters. That matters
Yeah,
to customers.
I I love a term you brought up a little bit ago, alignment. You mentioned that a couple times.
Yeah,
Yeah, it seems like that's kind of the common thread that's tying a lot of your concepts together, is making sure that what you're selling is that your values with your product are aligned with the customer's values and the potential buyer's values, making sure that the sales team's values are aligned with the mission of the company. It
that's
all
right.
comes down to alignment. If everything is in alignment, then the everything's profitable, everyone's happy at the end, everyone's making good decisions together.
It flows. That's right.
Yeah.
And that's why I called the book Leadership Selling. Be a leader, sell to leaders, right? Like take that leadership role on when you're working with a client, okay? Understand their business, be genuine, um, you know, offer to help them. Okay, and if you can't help them, tell them you can't, right? That's all leadership. That's, honesty, integrity, sincerity, business acumen, all those things matter. Vision, right? These are the characteristics that we look for in leaders. Setting a direction, right? Inspiring and empowering people. That's what we look for. Okay, and when we interact with other people in that way, where we're really helpful and genuine, you build a relationship. You understand what's going on. They understand you. Now you can help each other. And customers want to buy stuff. They just want to buy stuff that's going to achieve their goals. They're ready to make changes. Here's something I always remind people, especially salespeople. When you call on, why should you call on the executives versus the middle managers? Middle managers are paid to run the business, not change it. Executives are paid to change it. Okay? They've got the authority and the responsibility to change that business. All right? They want to make change. They need to make change. They're ready to invest in change, time and money. They just have to find the right person to work with.
I love that. That's um yeah. That you've got it's cool. You've got the same sort of visions coming through in all these different facets.
Thank you.
As an aside, how do you like Vermont? I spent a few months there in high school. I went to a small school called the Mountain School. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it. It's in Vermont, Vermont. I was there for
Yep.
one semester in high school. But how?
Good
Yeah,
for you.
are you from Vermont
Oh,
originally?
Vermont's awesome.
Yeah.
I moved here 30 years ago and I hope to die here. It's a great place to live. It's beautiful and it's got a lot of outdoor activities and, people are really genuine here. They're lovely people. And honestly, I think because it's small, it makes it just inherently a little bit safer. And there's a lot of creativity here. Even though it's a tiny state, we've produced a lot of successes. We've got, Keurig and Green Mountain Coffee and Ben and Jerry's and, a whole bunch of others. I mean, it's a fun little place to live. I really love it here. And if you come back, make sure you look me up. I'll show you around, and we'll go skiing if it's wintertime or sailing if it's summertime. That'd be lovely.
Yeah, I might take him. Are you in Burlington or?
Yeah, I'm right outside of Burlington. Yep,
Awesome.
yep.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite places. One of these falls. That's one of my favorite things I've ever seen is Vermont in the fall when the leaves are changing.
Yeah,
That's as good as any mountain view, as good as any sunset on the beach. That's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
it is remarkable, and our population triples during what we call leaf peeping season. And, part of why leaves change is the temperature, right? And so what people do is they go to the northern part of Vermont, which is right on the Canadian border. And when the leaves start changing, they slowly drive, south, and then they extend that experience because the leaves keep on changing as the temperature cools. And so the further south you go, the longer it takes for it to get cool. So there's a couple of roads on Vermont that are just like completely filled with RVs and people that are here from out of state to enjoy that whole experience. And I'm real lucky because I live here. I get to see it every year. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's definitely a special place, and that's it's on my short list of places to settle down. We'll see. We'll see
Good.
where life takes
And,
me.
and where are you located?
I just moved to Nashville, or outside of Nashville.
Okay, that's fun.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a
yeah,
really fun part of the world.
yeah.
Yeah, I
It's
love
a
Nashville.
lot of cool stuff going on here too. But everywhere's got its beauty. You gotta learn to make the most out of where you're at. So how
That's
can
right.
people find you? Where should people look? Where's your book? Um,
Yeah, so obviously I have a website for my business, but I'll direct people to the book because that'll point them in the easiest direction. It's leadership-selling.com.
okay.
Leadership-selling.com. And if you go there, you'll get some information on the book, a little bit of information about me. You've got my an email to contact me and a phone number. And I invite people to reach out to me. I don't bite. And I'm happy to share information.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing this information here. That link will be in the bio everywhere this video is posted. And yeah, thanks, Joe. This was really cool.
Oh, Jake, it's been awesome. I can't believe how much time has gone by. I've thoroughly loved it. You're awesome. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.